the current state of trying to get my water as well as my nutrition into 4 shakers. Now, this is a project that has been going on for a couple of months, even years, and it's basically the latest iteration of trying to meal prep my meals. Now, before this, actually in the last months, what I tried is to get my meals packed in something like this. This is just a meal box, and I would prepare these meals usually in just a giant pot. I would cook chicken, also turkey, together with frozen vegetables, and then get it in here together with cottage cheese and usually 2 eggs. So this is what this looks like. I then also added a spoon, and then I added another zipper bag outside of it, because otherwise sometimes there was basically food sauce on the outside of it, and as it unfroze, so I kept this in the freezer. And as I had them in the freezer, then I would put them into the backpack for the next day, and then usually until, let's say, lunch the next day or lunchtime the next day, these would unfreeze up to the point where they were kind of edible. Now, I would keep 2 of these, but because I increased the amount of vegetables that were in there, these didn't last me that long. So I introduced a curd shake, which is basically a protein shake, which I could then just drink and would not have to rely on something like this. The curd shake is made out of 500 grams of curd, which contains 60 grams of protein, plus about 500 milliliters of milk, maybe 300 to 500 milliliters of milk. And this is the first shake I already and still have. Now this shaker here not only contains the curd shake, but it is also the first part of this bigger system. So on the outside of my backpack I have two bags for bottles. And in one of these, usually to my left, I have basically food. That's one of the first principles. So one is food and another one is water. Now, in this water shaker, I not only have water, but also something else called electrolytes. The idea with electrolytes is that in order to get my brain functioning, or to have my brain functioning, I need salt in a given amount of time. And this has been mostly, so I've been adding salt since listening to people on the internet who said, especially during fasting, you want to add salt, and this actually helped me. And then I changed it to electrolytes in order to account for possible other deficits of these electrolytes. So currently I do have an electrolyte complex which contains potassium, chloride, calcium, magnesium, and sodium. And sodium is salt. Now, I put then 2 of these for a daily portion into one of these water shakers. Now, these water shakers are not just water shakers or not just water bottles, but what they actually are basically food shakers, and they are made by company Huel, even though it is not very visible because they had this giant logo on here, and I wanted a shaker that is similar in form, but I couldn't find one, so I bought them from this company. And I also have been trying their food powder already in 2022 with not much success, and now I ordered another 2 bags, and I have been trying again to maybe try this basically. Now, this here is the food shaker, this here is the water shaker, and these 2 now have different functions. Obviously, the water shaker ideally does not need to be cleaned. Now, of course, you can clean it maybe every few days, but the idea is, because it's a shaker, it can also be shaken. Maybe you can also shake a normal water bottle, but the idea is that I wanted to also reduce the amount of bottles I have to clean on a daily basis. So one idea was to just get all of these different shakers and to fill them with different kinds of food powder, and maybe also protein powder, and maybe also curd. And then whenever I would have water available, so this is already one of the main needs. This does not contain all the water for a given day, but it only contains the food for a given day. The water needs to be supplied, but since I usually am somewhere where there is tap water, and because I live in a country where the tap water can be is drinkable, or can be drunken, I don't know what a proper grammatical form here would be, I can add water at any point in time. That's already one of the requirements of something like this. But if you want to carry your water for a given day, then it becomes quite heavy already. Now, this is not that heavy actually, because this here only contains food powder, this here only contains protein powder, this here contains water, maybe about 750 milliliters, and this here contains curd, also about 750 milliliters with a similar density. This might even be a little bit heavier because, or I actually no, probably kind of a similar density. If so, then probably less density, because water is probably pretty dense even compared to curd. Now, once I drunk this, I don't know what the proper form is, but once I drank this in the morning, I can then use the shaker again. So again, I had the idea to maybe have multiple shakers and with different kinds of meals in them, and then I would just add water and shake them. Now, the first problem with this approach is that then the food powder would be on the bottom, whereas ideally you would have water on the bottom of the shaker, and then you would only add the food powder in it. The second problem was, once I am making something that has a full bottle of something like this, for example, I can either carry around basically the full bottle with food powder and then add some water into it, but then I can only have half of it filled with food powder, which would not be very space efficient. And because of this, now I have come up with this different system. And this different system is now that I have one of these bottles, and I actually could open one bottle up. It is just that there is already water in there, but I think it would make sense to at least have one bottle open. So therefore, let's take this here and drink a bit. What is also maybe good about the shaker is that you can kind of drink it from every angle, even though that's something that's kind of obvious. I think this design of the shaker, and also the form of the shaker and how it lies in your hand, and how you can also grab it like this, and then basically the rotation, the rotation itself, if you grab it not here, but here, goes basically against the rotation of this here, which allows you to not unscrew your food powder shaker. Now, once we open one of these bottles up, what we can also see that they are now symmetrical. Before, this lid and especially this lash here was not symmetrical, but it was rather to one side. I think this is a nicer design because, well, it's symmetrical. What they also changed with the latest shaker edition is the position of this here. On some shakers it's in this direction, and on some shakers, two of them actually, it's I think on another direction, even though now it's on this direction here, which maybe, yeah, here it's different. So here it's on the back, I don't know why. Now, if we take this off, what you can see is this lid here. Now, what this allows you to do is to put in food powder and then shake it with only a few shakes, and that's actually quite efficient. If I take this out and shake food powder, or also just the curd with milk in it, then it takes maybe twice, maybe 3 times the amount of shakes until the food powder is somewhat consumable. Now, in the beginning, and also in the first phase of my experiment with food powder, let's say in 2022, so that's now almost one and a half years ago, or almost 2 years ago, but more like 1.5 years ago. Now, what I tried back then was to have all my meals within kind of one sitting, and to have them very time efficient and so on and so forth. But it turns out that this seems to not work very well, at least when it comes to circadian biology, and mostly when it comes to my circadian biology. I also tried a few different experiments back then with sleep and so on and so forth, but I will not discuss these sleep experiments in here. Now, what you already can see is that there is basically a slight electrolyte powder in here. Now, this is not optimal, it's not completely solved, but it's not completely dissolved in the water, I think is the right wording, because they are actually made for swallowing them, so therefore the stomach acid actually would basically dissolve these tablets. Now, because they have this, and because they are not made for just dissolving in water, I think this is actually kind of a benefit, a time release benefit. So what I do now is that I throw 2 of these in there, then I add the lid for the water shaker, and then I just close it. And now I can go anywhere and always have electrolyted water, at least to a certain extent. Of course, this is not optimal, and also the dosage might be off, but if you throw in 2 additional tablets at a given day, then what you probably end up with consuming is about 2 tablets. And you can also vary this, obviously. Now, this is the water shaker. Now I will demonstrate the different kinds of shakers also on this shaker. Now, the food shaker now is a little bit different, even though it's also kind of, I mean, it's the same shaker, it's the same model. Now the food shaker, in the beginning of the day, as I already mentioned, contains already something. I also thought about maybe getting rid of this also. Now, the problem with this approach is that I think up to this point my body has begun to kind of rely on this, and I also seem to digest it very well, and it also seems to not take away from too much of my mental availability, let's just say, if I drink this here. Now, with other kinds of foods, I often notice, especially with carbs, that my mental performance begins to decline after eating, but not so much with this. So I decided to not experiment so much and at least leave one of these shakes, the curd shake, in my nutrition. It seems to just work very well with my body. There is also the galactose in milk, and so I might have some carbs in there, but mostly it's protein, it's also thick, it fills me, and if I drink this, let's say so I work out usually beginning at 6:30, then I drive to the gym, so I begin working out at 6:50 maybe, and then I work out for until basically 7:30, including stretching, and then around 1 or 2 or 3 hours later, I usually drink this curd shake, and I stand up at 6 o'clock these days. Now, this is then basically my breakfast, but I don't have to prepare my breakfast, at least not in this day, because I prepare my breakfast actually usually the day before. And now the question is, how can you already pack your backpack, because this was another ideal I would strive towards, or I would try to strive towards, while having this and not forget your curd shake in the fridge. The solution I found for this is, instead of adding 500 milliliters of milk, I only add a little bit less milk than this. So I put in the curd, then I put in ice cubes, so about half a tray of ice cubes, and then I pour in the milk, and I also add some salt. So maybe if you have a salt shaker that is kind of releasing salt, if you turn it over, I leave it in for maybe a half a second or 1 second, and that's kind of the salt that my body seems to want, at least if I approximate my salt need by my salt taste. Now, I then have this, I still need to kind of shake it, but it also cannot be shaken that well because there are ice cubes in there and they make the curd colder, which then means it is not as fluid. I then take this and can already put this into my backpack, even though it might be hours before I go to bed. But then if I wake up in the morning, and this might be 12 hours later, let's say, it still holds through the entire day, at least in the last months, but it has also been winter, but this has also usually been indoors. Now with 2 shakers it might be different. I also tried 2 curd shakes, but 2 curd shakes means also you have to prepare 2 curd shakes, and even though the curd itself, I can actually get a pack, is already in a semi-liquid form, so this is the curd I use. It's just curd, and it has 0.3 grams of fat for 100 grams and 12.1 grams of protein. Now, even though this is in a semi-liquid form, getting it in there, as you already see, is kind of not the easiest thing. So it's just taking a knife, or you take a spoon. I haven't just figured out a proper way. Maybe it's mixing the curd in something else, because you can actually get out all of the curd into maybe a bowl, but then how do you mix it together with the milk only to then get it in there again? And then you have to clean the other thing. So it usually takes me, I would say, 10 minutes to just fill this again, with cleaning up, with also getting this out, with washing this bottle once. So I wash the food shake once a day. I then fill in the curd in the evening before, or once I get home. I already prepare basically the backpack as well as the curd shake for the next day. And that's kind of the maximum amount of food I prepare for the next day. Now, what I also have switched towards is just having dinner at home. So what this now is, I mean, in theory, you could use this probably, at least for some parts of the week, for your entire daily nutrition, but because of the preparation time, I just cut it down to basically food powder, protein powder, the curd shake, and also the water shaker. Now, once this is packed, I then put it into my backpack, and now this again is obviously the water shaker, but it then is filled with curd. Now, for this bottle, we don't need to know much any longer, or there is no much more to tell. This is just a water bottle, and I refill it with water. I also thought about maybe having the water bottle and then having basically the food powder in the water bottle, but this then means that if I have at least one curd shake, or at least one shake that's kind of prepared already in the morning, and then I pour in something that it is not entirely water or electrolytes into this, then I also have to clean this. And now, because I try to reduce the amount of time I need to prep for the next day once I come home, so basically I come home, I take my gym clothes out, I switch them with the other rotation, I then take the curd shake out, or the empty food shaker, and then I fill in the curd shake. And I just wanted to reduce the amount of time I need for food preparation while having meals fully prepped, and while knowing then for the next day, or maybe also for 2 days, that I could rely basically on my rucksack to deliver all my food needs and all my other needs in terms of water and also in terms of electrolytes. Now I also keep 2 packs of electrolyte tablets, one in kind of my office bag and one additionally in my rucksack. And then the next thing now is, and the obvious question then was, how could I come up with a system that would allow me to refill my food shake without having to make meals? So sometimes prepping 2 of these meals, if there are only 2 left, means that you stand for an hour in the kitchen, because then I would also kind of merge dinner as well as cooking this together, and then I would end up maybe listening to a podcast, and then it just becomes this big thing, and I kind of want to avoid. I mean, some part of me also likes cooking, some part of me obviously also likes eating, but it is just, if I, again, today, for example, I took a look at the week. If you have 24 hours and then you sleep already 8 hours, or you at least schedule 8 hours of sleep, and then you from standing up to having finished workout and beginning to work already have lost 2 hours, and also weighing yourself in the morning, maybe measuring your blood pressure, then it's already, and then you work for 4 hours maybe, and then you need to have lunch. And I tried having lunch with this. I also tried walking while having lunch, while having these boxes, and also walking outside in order to get your sunlight in, and so on and so forth. It just takes away so much time one could use otherwise. And that's kind of the idea I wanted to implement in some way or another, or at least to try to approximate it. So now, once the food shaker is empty, so I drink the curd shake, and what I have come down to is to just drink it kind of in maybe 10 minutes. Sometimes. So another thing I thought about was, if I actually am hungry enough, then I can drink the full thing in kind of one sitting. So for today, for example, I just went to the bathroom, and as I went to the bathroom, as I refilled my water bottle, I just also drank all of the shake. Now, when I then am in front of a sink, what I also then can do is to already pour in additional sips of water, basically. I then shake it again, I drink the rest. I shake it again, I drink the rest, I shake it again, drink the rest. If I do this 3 times, then the shaker inside is fairly clean. So you could then leave this for the rest of the day, even if it's summer, and it will not begin to kind of smell until the evening. Now, if you want to be really clean, then maybe do 5 times. Of course, you cannot drink that much because you can only drink so much in a sitting. And also this water then that comes from this food shaker is not electrolyted, which means that you would have to balance it out with electrolyted and salted water again, at least in my thinking, because otherwise I do get thirsty, and then I can drink something, but I obviously need to drink salted water because otherwise my electrolyte balance seems to just be thrown off. Then the next part is now where I introduce these other 2 shakers. So now I have just a protein shaker in case I need kind of another curd shake. Now, of course, there is no milk in it, but if I then carry the milk also contains lots of water. And basically, if you take milk and just reduce it to protein, it's kind of whey protein. Now, you also take the fat out, obviously, from the milk, but then this is what is in here. So if we take a look at this, then this is just whey protein. It's just pure whey protein with, I think, a few BCAAs and something like this. This is fairly light, actually. If we would weigh this, I think it would be... We could actually weigh this. Or let's maybe not, because then I run around getting all of these things and don't get the video done, and then I make a mistake, and then I delete the video because I don't edit videos. So therefore, it's fairly light. This is the food shake. Currently there is Huel in it. I also actually already got the different kinds of things I have in there. So the first thing I have in there is Huel in this case. I did think about different food powders. I also looked at company Bulk, and they also make a food powder. They also make a ketogenic shake. It is just that this ketogenic shake is sweetened. And from my experience, I cannot have anything sweetened in my nutrition. Otherwise, I cannot really trust my hunger and also my satiety. If I get all of the sweetened things out and I also get fructose out, so I don't eat fruit, then I can trust my satiety and my hunger, and this seems to then optimize my performance. So hunger then is something I can trust compared to if I eat a lot of junk food and a lot of sweet things, and also with sugar and even with sweetened things like stevia or sweeteners like stevia, then I cannot really trust my hunger because it is kind of overstimulated. So at a given level of hunger, I then could eat more of these foods, and this is obviously not very beneficial. So what I currently have here is just normal whey protein from Bulk. So Bulk seems to be kind of the company that I usually order at, because, well, I ordered in the beginning, maybe I could switch, and also they have a fairly wide range of products, but some of these products are also very expensive. Now, one of the main questions was, can I actually replace fully my nutrition with this here? And the answer to this is that it probably would be kind of a risk to just eat something that is kind of the same foods again and again. In this year, which is also in addition vegan, and I did not have the best experience with trying to be vegetarian or vegan, even though I don't actually know what exactly led to what, and also, so it's basically, I think, very hard to make any kind of conclusions from something like this. And this is also maybe by standardizing something like nutrition down to eating the same thing every time you eat again, would maybe also allow me to basically track the different impacts of different variables, such as doubling creatine intake to 10 grams, which I have now been doing. But what I also have been doing is I got rid of taking turmeric again in order to see if there is kind of a effect of maybe DHT being not that blunted by turmeric, which is something a few people, including Andrew Huberman online, said. So I cannot exactly find out. So maybe it's the creatine to 10 grams from before 5 grams. Maybe it's increased sleep quality. Maybe it's just that I had a lucky day in the gym today and I was able to maybe pull and push a little bit more compared to the weeks before. But I don't know. Now, in this, for example, what we have in here is pea protein, ground flaxseed. Flaxseed is also something that is found again and again in kind of these products, in part because it is something that's probably not that expensive, even though if I then buy 1 pack of flaxseed and I bought 1 kilogram of flaxseed, it's, no, this is the greens. I actually also have a similar package with flaxseed. It was 28 euros, which is utterly ridiculous, because I then realized that in the grocery store, the same thing kind of sells for 150. And it was also, it was not 150, but it was at least significantly cheaper compared to this one. What I also got is greens. So Bulk only offers one greens product, and it's called Complete Greens. And this was ridiculously expensive. I don't actually want to announce how expensive it was, because it's just ridiculous, and I have been regretting this, but I also didn't send it back, and I also wanted at least to see what it tastes like, and so I opened the 1 bag and I ordered a kilogram, and they gave me 2 500-gram bags, and so now I just have it, and I regret that I spent this much money on something like this, even though I could have bought pounds of vegetables. But also, this, of course, does not contain the water. So if you buy a kilogram of vegetables and you would reduce all of the water, then what is left of the vegetables? Maybe 50 to 100 grams, and the rest is water, maybe even less than this. So if you have something that is a kilogram of vegetables and it's without water, then it might be fairly many vegetables. So now, one problem of maybe eating only something like Huel would be that Huel also contains vitamins. Now the problem with vitamins is that I already take a daily vitamin. And if I then do not consume 2000 calories of Huel, which the company recommends in order to get the daily portion of vitamins properly, so basically the company kind of relies on only you eating only Huel, because otherwise you cannot get all the nutrients you need from Huel, which would make it kind of an exclusive diet. But it would probably also not be the best to go on an exclusive diet. So I've read online, for example, that somebody just ate Huel and Huel and Huel, and then they tried to eat something else again, and they had bloatings all the time, I think. Now, what one could deduct from this is that probably the gut microbiome adapts to the food you eat all the time. So maybe that's what has been happening. That's just one interpretation of it, even though that's just a random guess. Now, and therefore then couldn't digest properly these other kinds of foods. Now, let's just, instead of saying that in this food shaker is Huel, let's just say there is the ideal food powder. So you take all the different kinds of foods and either you mix it yourself, or in the future you have a company that delivers it to you. Brian Johnson, for example, someone who tries to rejuvenate himself, recently also made products available. And for the most part, it seems to be different kinds of vegetables and cacao and so on and so forth. So what I've also done is I've tried these different kinds of products again. So cacao, for example, I got it at the grocery store again, and I've been adding it to a meal I am making when I'm at home. And yeah, well, but what I realized again, and this is one of the main reasons I actually am trying this again, is that even so, Brian Johnson set out to basically try to get the healthiest diet, and then he made up these meals, and then now that he is making them available for purchase, he contains them, or he makes them as a food powder. Why is this the case? Because probably food powder, removing all of the water, getting it in a powdered form, and then basically allowing to only with water drink the whole thing and gulping the whole thing, or you can also sip on it and enjoy it for an hour, might be just the most efficient way to, first of all, transport all of this, and second of all, make it kind of shelfable, even though shelfable might be not something you want to optimize for in terms of food. And there's already kind of one of the downsides. The more shelfable something is, the less fresh it might be, and so on and so forth. So if you have vegetables and you freeze them, they might contain more vitamins and so on and so forth, compared to the vegetables you have for a couple of days in the fridge, or the fruit you have out in a fruit bowl. But then if you make something shelfable and dry it, then maybe you get rid of a few of these positive things about food. And that's already maybe one of the biggest concerns. And just in general, this is not something I would want anyone to replicate. Nonetheless, I want to at least take notes for myself, at least in the future, and to put this together in kind of one video where I discuss kind of the current state of trying this. Because I just want to have more time. And actually, of course, it is nice to also eat food. But what would be even nicer is if I could make something. If I could make something over time that I would like to make. If I could work more hours, basically. If I could, and even if I don't work more hours, if I get rid of 1 hour of eating every single day, then I could socialize 1 hour every single day. I could go to a random course in my gym for an hour every single day if I get rid of just eating food. Now, I don't really get rid of eating food. It is just that from the ideal of maybe cooking every single time you eat and making everything fresh and having a salad, to okay, you just eat something that's kind of already made, but maybe also ideally healthy. So this might be a different thing. So it might be a triangle, actually, something that is basically quick, something that is super fresh and healthy, and then there is something that is quick but also junk food. So there might be different values, and on this triangle you can go into different directions, even though I think it didn't make the most sense with this triangle. Now, the reason I got these greens is that I could add vegetables. Now, how do I add the vegetables? If I then have this step of mixing together my own food powder, then I would also have to basically iterate on this food powder. So with every new kind of scientific finding, I would have to iterate this food powder again and again. But if I instead reduce the complexity of this problem and just say, okay, I just buy one product from a company, or I buy another product from another company, and I just get this powder delivered ideally to my door, which in case of these products doesn't happen. So what I usually have to do is drive around the city for 30 minutes to an hour, usually it's an hour, and get actually the packages, because they are not dropped off basically at a point where I can pick them up. And I couldn't, in 2 years since living here, I could not resolve this issue. So this is another issue I'm trying to work out, but this is not so much related to this. So ideally, you would get your ideal nutrition delivered to your door, and then you would just say, okay, on this day I need so many calories, and then you would pour in the calories, and then you would just drink it. Now, the problem with this approach maybe is that, at least in my case, my calories and my caloric need seems to vary a bit. And also what I want to eat seems to vary a bit. And probably, I assume at least, there is some information contained in my hunger, basically. So if I'm hungry for tomatoes after sauna, almost every single Sunday after I go to the sauna, then there is probably something in tomatoes and also cucumber, which I also crave after sauna, that is probably something my body needs at this point in time. And if I then would only eat or drink Huel, then the problem might be that I have these other things that also come with it, like maybe some fat, like maybe some carbohydrates, which in this case, after sauna, I often don't actually need because I'm not that hungry. I just want something that probably contains minerals or something like this. And maybe not just electrolytes, maybe some kind of, maybe it's iron, maybe it's something else, I don't know. Now, let's just assume this is the ideal food powder. I still wanted to have, in addition to the ideal food powder, 1 shaker of ideal food powder, I also wanted to have protein powder. Now this, maybe you could get in the future something like a curd shake, and also in powdered form. Currently, I just opted for this. What you could possibly add, if you want to add more fat, is either flaxseed, which contains a little bit of fat. But what you also could add is milk powder. So there is also something called milk powder, even though Bulk, for example, I think does not sell it. But if you have milk powder, you could just also have protein powder. You could also add something like olive oil, which should also be very healthy. But again, the idea was for this year that I would have food powder in 2 shakers and water in 1, and 1 is the food shaker. And if I have olive oil in there, I mean, how do I then shake this? And how much olive oil do I then add? And then I have a liquid, which I need to measure out, and olive oil contains lots of calories. So what I opted for is that everything had to be in powdered form. The idea was that I either have a powder that is completely already finished, or I mix my own powder, maybe also using the same bags, and I would have at home a shelf with all the different ingredients. So I would have vegetables, I would have flaxseed, I would have whey protein, I would also have maybe a different kind of protein. I actually took a look at meat protein, and Bulk also sells meat protein. Now this might be something that one usually does not consider, and maybe there might be other concerns with something that is meat and in powdered form, but this is something that you or I have to discuss probably on our own. Now, I still wanted to include this as an option. If I wanted to have kind of also different kinds of foods in there, then I could make my own food shake. And this was kind of the idea. So I purchased lots of different ingredients, but until this day, what I ended up with is just trying at least Huel. Now, I am still not really adapted to Huel, and even though I already tried it 2 years ago, I still am not adapted, and it seems to still cause kind of issues in my gut. Maybe this will be resolved over time. I have been just trying again and again, and today, for example, I had approximately 2 scoops of Huel, which seems to amount to 400 calories. Now, in order to measure then, after a given day, how much food powder you actually ate, in this case, if you have Huel and it's already, or if you have a food powder that is already a finished product, then what you could say is that if you take this and just refill it up until the point where you usually have refilled it, so now there is kind of this much this much missing, then what you could do is just measure basically how much you pour in there, and this would be what you then track in terms of the calories. So you could also weigh this before and then pour in as much as or until this is filled and then weigh it again. So you would have exactly weighed out what you ate during this day, and then you could track your calories. Now, if you mix your own food shake, then you could also create your own food in MyFitnessPal. And I already tinkered around with a few different formulas, and I already made kind of previous food shakes before, but they were not in powdered form. For this iteration of the experiment, wanted to have everything in powdered form and then either have a ready to drink food shake that's basically powdered form, or I would make my own with kind of different parts in it. And then I would just have this bag and I would just not remix it, but refill this shaker. Now, in terms of the protein, there seems to be at least some evidence, or at least some people say that it's probably pretty decent to have protein in the morning, then have kind of a normal meal, and then in the evening again to kind of bridge the potential protein needs you would have in the morning or at night, because protein cannot really be stored unless you store it already in the muscles. This means that I would have this in as a kind of, if I, for example, get out and then there is an emergency and I have to travel somewhere else, then I would have a full shaker of this with protein. And this contains, I think, about 10 scoops each, I think 30 grams of protein. And this here is kind of similar. So I took the scoops from Huel and they contain, I think, around 70 milliliters, if this is correct. So I don't know. I think there is nothing in there, but I think I've read somewhere else before that there is 70 milliliters of volume in there. Also, these shakers have a bigger handle compared to the bulk shakers, which I previously used, but I also now use them for the food powder. I just fill them less, so I then have the protein portions properly filled. Now, what this means is that I have protein whenever I need protein. And not only have I protein here, but it is protein in the purest form. It is whey protein, and it's the protein that's basically at least not meat, but it also is fairly high in the protein bioavailability, at least compared to plant protein, for example. I do also have plant protein, and this Huel Black is a product that contains more protein compared to the normal version. That's basically made for people who lift, and also for people who do different kinds of sports. So the idea is for this to be a system. And one idea about the system is that it is kind of interchangeable. Now, will I interchange much of the water? Probably not. So the water will kind of be very similar. Maybe I can have a different kind of electrolyte in there. Maybe I have different capsules in the future. I don't know. But what the system means is that I do have these 4 different shakers. I keep 2 of them on the bottom of my rucksack. I then put kind of my office bag on top of this, and these just sit in the bottom. Then there is another thing on the bottom, and there I keep different things. But then I have kind of a separator, then these are in there, these 2 bottles, and then there is kind of my office bag. My rucksack is also fairly big, but I want to have the ideal of the rucksack to be a rucksack that I can live out of kind of for a week if I really need to. Now, of course, I cannot get all of the different kinds of needs in terms of nutrition and also in terms of water out of my rucksack, but at least I'm trying to approach this idea. Now, in terms of refilling on the road, in terms of the curd shake, you can refill it in theory, but in practice it probably, unless you have kind of a kitchen, is probably a big thing you have to do, because you have to have a knife or a spoon, and then you try to fill the curd in there, and then you also need to add the milk, and then you might have leftover milk. So in theory, you could just go up to any supermarket and get a curd shake. And the curd shake is basically kind of the protein shake you can get at every single supermarket, or you just get the curd and add water. So therefore you also have no fat and also less carbs, because milk contains additionally to the protein, fat and carbs. Now, you could, in theory, therefore, replenish the milk shaker. But if you go to a grocery store and then outside of the grocery store on a bench somewhere try to get the curd in there, well, it's maybe not something you want to do or I want to do. I want to have things clean, and ideally nobody would see that I even eat food. It's just this idea of, okay, what if I could just constantly work? What if I could at least try to approximate this? Of course, I also need my downtime and so on and so forth. But at least if I want to work on days on which I want to work, I could maybe avoid it and just drink something, and then it's done. And I'm not hungry anymore, and I don't have this big, gigantic task of making something or getting something and then getting something from a restaurant, and then you might have macronutrients and you might have also sugar in there. And there have been many times at which I thought, okay, I get just something from a restaurant or somewhere else, and then you have the most basic product, and then you have 10 grams of sugar in there, which then skews your appetite and makes you hungry for the rest of the day, and also makes you irritated and so on and so forth. It just seemed to not work out with me. So I now have the kind of a secure option that I just have my food with me, which is to some extent ridiculous. But it also to some extent is just the most practical option, and also maybe the most healthy option. So compare something like this and the potential downsides of drinking food powder to any other option that would be available. Going to McDonald's, for example. If you are really hungry and you want to travel somewhere and you are at night at a train station and the McDonald's is the only thing that is open. I was in this situation, and then I was quite hungry, and I really did have to prevent myself from buying just random chocolate bars. So basically muesli bars with chocolate. But then if I have my food with me, and this is what I did for my last travel, then I just unpack this, and for my last travel I had this with me. But then it's also this big thing, and then you also have maybe dirty hands because something falls out, and then you have the spoon. And drinking the food, especially when traveling, especially if you don't have time, and then also being able to wash the shaker on the outside in every sink basically, and also refilling the shaker on every sink, seems to just be a so superior option to this. Now, the future of this project. I don't know if I will stick to the shakers forever. I don't know if I stick to this exact outline of these 4 shakers forever. I also thought about a 5th shaker. I also thought, as I mentioned already, about having the bottles already filled with powder and then just filling the water in them. But the problem with this approach, one problem of this approach, which I didn't mention yet, is that you can portion now. So if you have, let's say, this curd shaker, so the food shaker is already empty. The food shaker is already empty. What I do then is I then refill it up until approximately here. Or maybe up until here. So basically, you want to already fill in the water you want to use for your next food shake. Once you have the water filled in, and you can already do this once you get rid of the food rest of the previous shake, then you take now either protein or you take your food shake, and then what you do is you take this here, and because this might be a little bit dirty, you put it into the lid. Then you take the lid and put it somewhere on the ground, and this doesn't tip over, as you already begin to see. If you have this and you put this down somewhere, then it could be contaminated, so there could get dirt or bacteria on there. But if you take this and put it in here, of course your hands might also be dirty, so you might want to wash your hands before. Then also the rest of potential food rest is kind of dropping down into basically this here, and this here is something you screw on again. Now of course you also might want to avoid then dripping the thing that is in there, but because this lid fits in here, this is also, I think, something that's worth mentioning. What's also something that's worth mentioning is that I already tried to get something like omelette, for example, in here. And what then one could potentially use this, and this is also maybe something why this design of these shakers again comes into play, or just the many possible scenarios, what I can imagine from these shakers, or these shakers could be used for, is that you could also use this in order to have like a spoon and eat soup out of this. So you might not want to get this too hot, but maybe if you have like oats and then you add a little bit of milk, you could hold this in your hand like a cup and also use it like a cup. And so therefore you would not have to carry an additional cup if you go camping, for example, because it's already in your water bottle. And now, back to refilling this shaker. What you then would do, and this is what I did today for kind of the second time, because I only tested this for the second time today, but I have to mention that I tested this a few times already at home. It's only that on the road, kind of, on traveling, because I usually then avoid these food shakes and then just get home for dinner, that's kind of the reality of the situation, that the different incentives, or the incentive structure of, okay, I have real food at home, then seems to kind of drive me home, unless I create basically an incentive structure that kind of keeps me from this. So what I'm currently experimenting with is to put kind of layers in between there, such that it is harder in order to basically get then to the next thing. But this is something else I'm experimenting with, and it actually seems to be kind of working. Now, you then have the shaker filled up until here, and what you then can do is you take off only this lid, and now there would also maybe be a scenario in which you only fill the shaker, this food powder shaker, up until here, and then you could try to pour it. But why would you do this if you could also use this as a funnel and then just pour this in like this? You don't even have to then clap on the shaker like this in order to get the food powder in there, because you can just pour it in there and then basically shake it a bit, and then something else comes out. And then you can add this, and then you just add this, and then you just shake it. So today what I did is I shook it 30 times. I usually count when I do anything with reps. This comes from going to the gym maybe a few times in the last years. So I often count when I do reps, at least if I'm not talking at the same time. So I've shaken this 30 times today. I also tried it already with 20 times. And what I did today is I poured in two kind of scoops of the scoops I showed you earlier. It seems to be the amount. So what today happened is that I trained in the morning. I then drank the curd shake at around 9. I then began to become hungry at around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. And then at 3 o'clock, around 3 o'clock, I had this third shaker also with me, the food powder shaker. Then I poured this into the food shaker, and then I had about 2 scoops of fuel. And then at around 6, I actually got grocery shopping and also drove home and then ate. But I was not that hungry, because for some reason I was still kind of filled with this here, with the food shaker. And that's now kind of the system. What you also could potentially do is you could basically increase the protein. You could basically mix those two. But for simplicity's sake, I think it makes sense that if you just want any kind of food, if you are just hungry, then you just take the food shaker. And if it is evening maybe and you are still hungry, then at least in my case, this often seems to be protein hunger, which then carbs, so if I would then eat carbs, would only kind of increase my, or ramp up my digestive systems again and again. Not again and again, but would basically lead to too much side effects, and what the body actually just wanted might be protein, and also in the morning, so I still have the option for protein. You could also fill them both with protein powder, you could also fill them both with food powder, you could make your own custom shakes out of this and fill them in there, not out of this, but out of different ingredients. The main thing, what I wanted to summarize this with now, even though my language and sentences often don't make sense, I know, because well, maybe I should record a few videos again, and then I usually notice that my sentences make more sense, at least on average. Now, what I wanted to present in this is the system. The system of, okay, I have 2 bottles. These bottles are not too big, they are not too heavy, and one is the water bottle. You have to have a water bottle with you anyway. I just replaced my water bottle with the shaker, and also because I previously used a soft plastic water bottle, not the best, but I also didn't want to switch it with a glass bottle. I switched it with the shaker. That was step 1. The second step was then that I just wanted to have kind of the thing I already would eat at home usually, and then I just put it into a shaker, which was curd plus milk, is the protein shake. Is the curd shake. I then also add the ice cubes in order to make it last longer. And then all the food basically that I now carry with me, instead of buying these and then also preparing these, I just eat normal things at home. So the third meal is usually normal things at home. And the second meal then usually is, well, I mean usually, I'm just in the testing phase. Let's not make things too big. Then would be a food shake. And also if I in the future switch to something else, maybe get my food powder delivered by Brian Johnson if I can afford it, I don't know, would be a food shaker, but I would also contain or have a 4 shaker with the protein shaker. You could also potentially reduce this. You could get rid of the protein shaker. Maybe I will do this in the future. I don't know. Then I would have only 3. But usually with these kinds of things, because it is very important to me that I don't eat sugar, for example, and it seems to also be very important to my mental and physical performance, also over the long term, I, for now, carry these 4 shakers with me daily.